going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Healthy Living Scottsdale Podcast. I am your host, Coach Adam. I'm here with Coach Terra today. Just the two of us going at it here. We are going to be talking about muscle contractions today. We're in a hypertrophy phase currently, so get to see a lot of different types of muscle contractions, trying to train in all those specificities. Before we get into that, as always, we're going to go with our client members of the week. So I think we're going to go dual this week because there was a kind of a funny story that we're going to, one guy here, Josh Cantor is our first one, very deserving of a client of the week shout out. So Josh is a CEO of a company, so a very busy guy. I happened to have a one-on-one session with him at 3:00 on a random day this last week, and that doesn't happen very often. So we were going through this one-on-one, and then he gets a call, and he's like, I really got to take this. I was like, that's cool. Like, do what you got to do. So he goes and he grabs his AirPods, wears them the entire workout, and like proceeded to do like I was sitting there counting the reps, and like dude did not miss a single rep and finished his whole workout. So that's a shout out for like getting it in, right? Like getting it in no matter what. And he was walking somebody through like Excel, which is like not an easy thing to do over the phone.
And not looking at the screen?
And not looking at the screen, like had nothing in front of him. So it was just major props. Josh Cantor, first one right there. And then second one, Sarah Koch. She's in the afternoons. I don't know, you trained Sarah before? Maybe a couple times?
I might have. I don't remember.
She's she's awesome. She's a great client, really good with her tracking and everything. But she had a goal to go and complete a hike that she hadn't done in 20 years. And nice. She kind of gave us a shout out on our messaging app and just kind of shouted out the gym and said, thank you guys for like helping me get there. But she's been like really great due diligence like when she's here in the gym. So that was another kind of awesome story. So shout out to Josh and Sarah this week for members of the week. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into the bulk of it here, talking about muscle contractions. So a muscle contraction, a lot of people think about a muscle is shortening, right? It's getting tighter, it's shortening when we are using them. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the case with a concentric contraction. We're going to get into the different types. So muscle contraction does not always mean shortening. But basically, to get physiological with it, there are these two cross bindings that kind of happen between actin and myosin, and these are in your muscle fibers, and it's basically kind of a lock, grab, and drag kind of mechanism. It's a sliding filament theory if you want to look it up. We could probably be sitting here for 2 hours talking about it, so we're not going to do that. But we're going to go ahead and break it down by contraction type here. So going to start with the concentric contractions, then I'll toss it to you, Terra, for the eccentric. So concentric contraction, this is where we think of, most exercises when you think of a muscle that's shortening. So if you take a bicep curl, for example, that is you raising or curling the dumbbell or whatever it is from the bottom of the rep up, full range of motion to the top. Your bicep is shortening, right? And it's producing force. So you have to, a better way of putting it is you're overcoming an external resistance or an external load. So in the case of a bicep curl, which is a classic example, the dumbbells would be that external load. So another one that would be a good example is we could apply it to like a power movement. So like a split or like a squat jump, basically, right? You're at the bottom of your squat. Let's just say we're there. And the amount of force that you produce on the way up into that jump, that's your quad or your set of quad muscles basically shortening and contracting to produce that force. So I would say when people train, majority of the time they are concentric contractions. They can be tiring, but not the most tiring as far as fatigue, because they require a high number of motor unit recruitment. So like the sheer amount of muscle fibers or muscle that they demand to produce a movement is high, but not the highest that there are between all the three types of contractions. But definitely, I think there can be a misconception when talking about concentric contractions, and that's that, like, people say that the lift is, or like that concentric part is the most important part of a lift. That's not always the case. It kind of depends on what you're training. But I think that's a pretty good segue into eccentric. So Terra, you want to talk about eccentric contractions, how they're a little different from the concentric?
So I like to think of eccentrics as the way I remember the contractions. Okay. Eccentric, elongate. So getting longer. That's when the muscle's getting longer. So just talked about the shortening of the muscle. When you're doing an exercise eccentrically, that's when you're absorbing the force. So think of, he talked about the squat jump, of the release or getting off the ground. The eccentric portion of that is the landing.
Yeah.
Absorbing that force. Can your body take the force of, can the muscle, not the body, can the muscle take the force of that movement?
Right.
So when training the eccentric portion of that movement, or of any exercise, the eccentric movement, eccentric contraction of the muscle, is essentially that deceleration, that force, that loading, that feeling. I don't know how to, well.
It's like almost like braking.
Yeah,
you know,
the
like if you
braking
were to think of
force
like your car, like putting the brakes on maybe.
Yes,
kinda
exactly.
Like that. Yeah.
That's what we think about in sprinting, the braking forces, which you don't want.
Yeah.
But anyways. So to the converse of what he did for the bicep curl, the concentric is bringing the dumbbell up towards the body.
Yep.
The eccentric portion of that is now lowering that.
Yeah.
So that's when you really have to be in control of the weight. Because yes, when you're coming up, you're resisting it. But when you're going back down, the gravity is helping you speed that up. So you have to control that muscle. So that's the absorption of the force, understanding how not to just drop it. And that's how we're getting injuries, which is not necessarily throwing weights around, but not controlling that movement.
Right. I think control, like you're saying, control is the key word with eccentric, because, you know, it's easy to walk up to the dumbbells and just curl them up for anybody. So the concentric, you know, yes, it requires that you have some strength, but the eccentric contraction requires more muscle fiber and motor unit, more recruitment overall, because it's just a lot harder phase of the exercise itself. And that's what we, you know, a lot of times, like in our programming, we'll have dumbbell curl, but just strictly eccentric. So like, I don't even care what you do curling it up to your shoulders. The rep should start at the top, and you should work down. And usually we try to shoot for about a 3 to 4 second kind of elongating or eccentric like working period, because it's not too fast. It's also not too slow to the point where we're putting like joints in jeopardy or anything like that, because we don't want, you know, compensations to happen. Like we're using the bicep curl because it's classic, so we're just gonna roll with it. But like controlling something for like 6-7 seconds, like you're gonna start relying on your shoulders and, you know, your traps, and it's gonna get to places you don't want it to be. But I think eccentric is it's really important, because that's where, you know, common day, everyday injuries can take place if you're not training eccentric portions of muscle groups. So it's like you were runner, sprinter, perfect example. Deceleration, you know, say the race is over, you run your 100 or whatever it is, that decel after the race is over, slowing down, like there are injuries there. Man. There are injuries when people are going down flights of stairs and like walking down hills. You always hear it like when people go on a hike. Like, yes, the uphill, it's going to get your heart pumping. It's hard, but
you
the
hurt
downhill
yourself coming down.
Yeah, you hurt yourself coming down, because everyone's like, oh, my knees are killing me. That's because you're relying on your knee joint to try to absorb a bunch of force that
it's not supposed to take.
Yeah, it's not supposed to take your entire body weight worth of force, and should probably be relying on well-trained hamstrings or quads that have seen eccentric training before.
Yes.
That is where that's practical real life example of how and why you should train eccentrically, or just not underestimate it when you see it in your program. Like, yes, it takes more time. It might be a little bit more boring to you, but arguably more important. I don't know. I don't want to throw that like M word out there, but and then so let's go into the ISOs. So isometric,
Worst of them all.
maybe the worst according to Terra. I would have to agree, but it's just because it can be boring, right? Isometric literally means without movement. So we are not moving right now. I think yesterday in the gym we had a lower body pushing day.
Sit.
We had wall sits. So for those who know, obviously you're basically in like a seated chair position with your knees at 90 degrees, and we are asking you to hold that position. That is, we're asking all the muscle groups involved to maintain a certain level of applied force for a certain amount of time.
Yes.
So people that may not train isometric may have the strength to squat, 200 whatever pounds, whatever it might be, concentric. When they go and do a wall sit, not used to that amount of force over that amount of time. That's another example of why planks are probably the best core exercise there is, because what are you doing all day? No matter what, if you're sitting or standing, your core is maintaining your posture, right? For the most part. That's essentially an isometric contraction all day. If you're sitting with good posture and standing with good posture. Yeah. So you want to train like under those long windows of time. I don't know. Can you think of another one that what's like an ISO? We have wall sits, and we have some shoulder flexion and extension type stuff too. So like, because obviously we talked about, we had a shoulder podcast 1 or 2 weeks ago and talked about how the shoulder joint kind of sucks and isn't reliable. And so we do like basically a flexion or extension isometric hold, which is, your arm is out in front of you and you're producing force either with the back of your hand or with the palm of your hand into like a bench, right? And just showing shoulder, lat, like your whole rotator cuff, kind of how to sustain like force production over time. ISOs, we just went to the shoulder. Really good for joint health.
Yes.
Yeah. So shoulder, the wall sit would be knees and ankles also. So that's another good
stabilizing.
Yeah, they're really good for stabilizing joints, stabilizing muscles. Reasons for training all of them. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but for performance specifically, we can look at it as, any kind of jumping motion, no matter what the pattern is, jumps being concentric, right? Any kind of landing or planting or absorption of force is your eccentric. And then your isometric is that S word that you just used, stabilizing, all very practical in everyday life. Balanced strength. How do we want to phrase this? You don't want to train more one way or the other. Yeah, I think that's where people run into a lot of injury issues. I don't know, what would be a good example? Exercise-wise, maybe of like, I don't know, one that you only train, I don't know, maybe like a squat or like a bench press where you're only focused on
pretty much the concentric.
The concentric.
Unless we specify eccentric.
Right. We have to, like, when we have our programming open and, members are seeing it on their tablet and they see that ECC on there, it's like a little bit of like an eye roll, like, all right, this is going to take, longer than I wanted to, but it's a matter of trying to train them almost all equally and being well balanced. I would say isometric, if there's one to be trained slightly less, it's maybe isometric because you're getting, joint benefits out of the concentric and the eccentric exercises. But just like any other movement pattern, you want your pushing and your pulling to be similar, equal,
balanced, equal as you can get it.
Yeah. So I think overall takeaway from having these different, contractions, understanding what they are, understanding that they're going to pop up in different forms on your program is that muscles aren't just responsible for lifting the weights, but bringing them back down. The word you used earlier, control, was like control, stabilize, absorb, and yes, produce the force as well while you're lifting them. Little tweaks and things like timing and tempo are what's annoying, but can go all the difference and differentiate between these different types of contractions. So try to keep that in mind as you go through your programs. Everything has a purpose, and you might have one exercise that we're really asking you to do really hard effort concentrically, and then the one that it's paired with might be completely different. Like, it's not random. Like, there's a reason for it. So I don't know, you got anything else? Pretty much covered everything. Bottom line, strength, control the weights, don't just toss them around. There's a reason, so work with intention. I think we've talked about that before, having intention in your reps, and understanding that everything has a reason. So we'll be back next week with more good stuff, guys. Thanks so much for listening. See you later.
Thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Living Scottsdale Podcast. Do you have a question that you'd like for us to answer live on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to the Apple Podcast app on your iPhone and do 3 simple things. First, leave us a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. In that review, ask anything you want related to health, fitness, or nutrition. And if you want a shout out, leave us your Instagram handle or name. That's all you have to do. Then listen to hear your questions answered live on the next Q&A episode.